Imagine this. You've just done something truly incredible, something selfless that literally saves a stranger's life. Your body is still mending, still stitching itself back together from the ordeal. You're vulnerable, healing, perhaps feeling the quiet pride of a good deed done. But then into that fragile recovery walks the one person who once promised to love you forever. And instead of care, instead of comfort, he brings a knife. He stabs you again and again with such brutal force that the blade itself bends. Can you even begin to wrap your mind around that? This isn't some twisted fiction. This is the chilling reality of Renee Padgell's final weeks. She gave the ultimate gift of life, only to have her own brutally stolen. And while her killer eventually confessed, breaking years of agonizing silence, the question isn't just who did it. The real, gut-wrenching mystery is how a story that began with such profound light, such boundless generosity, could possibly end in such pitch-black darkness. What went so terribly wrong? Stay with me, because this isn't just a true crime tale. It's a stark, painful lesson in the insidious nature of control, the failure of systems, and the enduring power of a woman who gave too much. Renee Padgell was, by all accounts, one of those rare, radiant souls who just seemed to glow with kindness. She taught in a small Michigan town, and every single kid who passed through her classroom left knowing, deep in their bones, that they mattered. She wasn't just teaching them math and reading, she was teaching them their own worth. Colleagues would joke that Renee always seemed to have extra sandwiches tucked away in her bag, just in case a student forgot lunch, or a stash of warm winter coats in her trunk, like a one-woman lost-and-found operation for chilly kids. Her generosity wasn't just a habit, it was her very nature. Even after her marriage hit the rocks and fell apart, Renee didn't retreat into herself. Instead, she doubled down on her giving. Every 2 weeks, she'd head to the donation center to give platelets, telling friends with a shrug and a smile, somebody's kid might need this. It wasn't a grand gesture, it was just Renee being Renee. So when she learned that the father of one of her students was desperately ill, on dialysis, and waiting for a life-saving kidney, Renee didn't send flowers or a casserole. Renee Padgell, true to form, filled out the living donor paperwork. Her decision wasn't made lightly, but it was made with conviction. Doctors, of course, warned her about the arduous recovery. They told her it would take 6 to 8 weeks, a significant chunk of time, a period of vulnerability. But Renee just laughed, a bright, clear sound, and said, "What's a few weeks compared to somebody's whole life?" To her, the choice was obvious. The surgery was scheduled for August 2006. On the day, she even shared a quiet civil hug with her ex-husband Michael in the hospital corridor. He'd shown up for their kids, and Renee, ever the pragmatist, acknowledged the gesture. She went into that operating room a whole woman and woke up minus one kidney, plus a long incision that screamed of the sacrifice she'd made. Her friends rallied around her, a testament to the love and respect she commanded. They drove her home, tucked blankets around her on the couch, and took turns making sure her pain meds stayed on schedule. It was a slow, painful process, but Renee's spirit remained undimmed. That first week, she managed to text the recipient's sister, a triumphant little message. "He's peeing clear, mission accomplished." Her kidney, her incredible gift, was doing its job, filtering blood, sustaining a life. But what no one, not even Renee, could have known was that while her remaining kidney was learning to do double duty, an insidious, festering rage was learning to do the same inside the man she had divorced. A rage that saw her selfless act not as a triumph of humanity, but as a final, unforgivable act of defiance. Renee and Michael, high school sweethearts, once looked like the picture-perfect couple, the kind you'd see on the cover of a small-town wedding magazine. He worked construction, a man of his hands, while she, with her kind eyes and gentle demeanor, taught school. Together, they built a beautiful colonial home on 10 sprawling acres, seemingly building a life as solid as the foundation of their house. But beneath that polished surface, like dry rot hidden within the walls, something was slowly, inexorably, curdling. By the time baby number 3 arrived, that perfect mask Michael wore had begun to crack, revealing something far more unsettling. Renee, ever the confidant, started telling a neighbor that Michael's temper scared her. It wasn't just an occasional outburst. It was a volatile undercurrent, a simmering rage that would boil over, leaving her shaken. Michael, on the other hand, was telling his buddies a different story. He complained that Renee had become too holy after joining church committees, a thinly veiled resentment for her growing independence and community involvement. It seems her light, her innate goodness, was becoming a threat to his need for control. Their divorce filing wasn't a clean break. It dragged on for a grueling 26 months. Court records painted a picture of relentless, bitter conflict, with every single hearing devolving into a fresh fight. It wasn't just about the kids, though parenting time was a constant battleground. It was about everything: trucks, tractors, property, money, and most crucially, control. Michael's own brother would later articulate the core of Michael's fury, saying the only thing Michael hated more than paying alimony was losing control of the narrative. He wanted to dictate Renee's story, her life, even after they were no longer together. In the end, Renee got primary custody of their children and kept the house, a victory that, while legally sound, felt like another profound loss of control for Michael. She, in turn, tried her best to keep the peace, to create a stable environment for her kids amidst the wreckage of her marriage. Michael, however, seemed intent on making his resentment known. He took up with a new girlfriend and began a chilling new habit, parking at the end of Renee's driveway, ostensibly to check on the kids. It was an act of intimidation, a constant reminder of his presence, his watchful eye. Renee, feeling the escalating threat, responded by installing deadbolts on her doors, then motion-activated lights around her property. Finally, when those weren't enough to quell her growing fear, she sought and obtained a restraining order. Friends, seeing her brave face at school drop-off, would often ask how she managed to smile. Her answer, simple yet profound, encapsulated her strength and her unwavering focus: because my kids are watching. She was fighting not just for her own safety, but for their sense of normalcy, their peace. But Michael, stewing in a toxic brew of resentment and perceived humiliation, saw her resilience not as strength, but as an affront. He couldn't abide her moving on, her thriving without him, her very existence as an independent, giving woman. The stage was set, tragically, for the unthinkable. On August 5th, 2006, just days after her surgery, Renee was still in the delicate throes of recovery, her body tender, her energy still low. She was supposed to meet friends, but never showed up. Her worried father went to her home to check on her. The house was eerily silent. What he found next would shatter his life forever. Renee lay in her bed, her lifeblood having soaked through the mattress, a gruesome, horrifying tableau. The medical examiner would later count more than 50 stab wounds. The prosecutor during the trial would add an even more chilling detail. The killer had attacked with such ferocity, such violent intent, that Renee had extensive defensive wounds on her hands, and the attack had pierced her skull. This wasn't just a murder, it was an act of pure, unadulterated rage, a brutal, intimate assault. Investigators swarmed the scene, their grim faces reflecting the horror of what they saw. They lifted prints, meticulously collected DNA, and within hours, Michael Pagel was brought in for questioning. He was the most obvious suspect, the ex-husband consumed by bitterness. His story? He claimed he'd been at home, and then, with chilling predictability, he asked for a lawyer. And then, he stopped talking. For more than a decade, Michael Pagel offered nothing but silence, leaving Renee's family and a shocked community to grapple with an unspeakable tragedy and a haunting lack of closure. The knife had brought not an end to the conflict, but an endless, agonizing question mark. The case of Renee Pagel's murder quickly went cold. Detectives chased every conceivable lead, every whisper of suspicion. They looked into the tenant living on her property. They investigated disgruntled parents from Renee's school, exploring every remote possibility. They even considered the terrifying prospect of a serial killer passing through their quiet Michigan town. But every trail ran dry, every potential suspect cleared. All roads seemed to lead back to Michael, yet without a confession or irrefutable evidence, the case stagnated. The silence from Michael was absolute, impenetrable. Meanwhile, life, in its cruel way, moved on. In a shocking turn, Michael was given full custody of the 3 children and moved to another county, raising them himself for the next 13 years. Outwardly, he maintained a carefully constructed facade of normalcy, a chilling testament to his ability to compartmentalize. For Renee's parents and friends, there was no moving on, only moving forward with a gaping wound in their hearts, fighting to keep her memory alive for the children who now lived with her killer. Then, years later, a crack appeared in Michael's carefully built exterior. His second marriage began to sour, mirroring the toxic dynamics of his first. In 2017, his new wife made a frantic 911 call, detailing how Michael had choked her. But in a heartbreakingly common turn of events, she later refused to testify, and the charge vanished. Yet, that incident was a catalyst. In early 2020, Michael's brother, Charles, finally went to the police. He revealed that years earlier, in 2011, Michael had confessed. While on a bridge, Michael had pulled out a knife, told Charles, "This is how I finalized my divorce," and thrown it into the creek below. Charles had kept the secret for years, honoring their mother's wish to not say anything while she was still alive. After she passed away, he came forward. That single chilling statement was all police needed. The decade of silence was finally shattered. The call from Charles Padgel immediately reignited the dormant investigation. Detectives recovered the knife from the creek, and Michael was brought in. They read him his rights, the familiar legal incantation, and then they rolled tape. The air in that interrogation room must have been thick with the weight of unanswered questions. Michael, surprisingly, didn't fight it. In a voice devoid of discernible emotion, he began to speak. He described the events of that August afternoon with a chilling, almost detached precision. He'd parked his truck out of sight, a calculated move. He waited, he said, until the house was quiet, until he knew Renee was alone and vulnerable. However, when it came to the murder itself, he attempted to deflect. He claimed he didn't physically kill her, but had hired his brother Charles to do it, a claim prosecutors found no evidence to support. "I just wanted her to feel what I felt done with," he stated, offering a horrifying glimpse into his distorted psyche. He wasn't seeking justice or even revenge. He was seeking an emotional symmetry, forcing Renee to experience his own perceived pain and humiliation. When asked the inevitable question, why now, after all these years, he merely shrugged, a gesture of casual indifference. "Figured you guys would get me eventually," he mumbled, as if his confession was merely an inconvenience, an inevitability rather than an act of remorse. Prosecutors charged Michael Padgel with murder. He eventually pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in a deal to spare his children the trauma of a trial. The defense's earlier attempts to paint Michael as a victim were utterly dismissed. The jury took a mere 90 minutes to convict him. The judge, in delivering a sentence of 25 to 50 years in prison, turned to the gallery, to Renee's grieving family, and offered a poignant truth. Some stories don't have happy endings, but they can have just once. For Renee's loved ones, after years of agonizing uncertainty, justice finally had arrived. Renee's death wasn't a random act of violence. It was a tragic, predictable outcome born from a toxic intersection of control, entitlement, and a legal system that too often assumes the best of people until they prove the absolute worst. This wasn't a sudden explosion of rage. It was the culmination of years of escalating control and resentment, a slow-burning fuse that finally detonated. Domestic violence experts will tell you with chilling certainty that the most dangerous moment for a victim is often after she leaves. When the abuser's fantasy of reconciliation collapses, when they realize their control is truly gone, that's when the risk of lethal violence skyrockets. Michael Padgel wasn't just angry about the divorce. He was enraged by Renee's independence, her ability to build a life without him, her refusal to be dictated by his narrative. He saw her strength as a personal insult, her autonomy as a challenge to his very identity. Now, layer on top of that a public act of profound kindness, Renee's kidney donation, an act that, in Michael's warped perception, stole his spotlight, showcased her inherent goodness in stark contrast to his own bitterness. Season that with a custody ruling that gave Renee primary care of their children, a ruling he undoubtedly read as ultimate humiliation, a public declaration of his failure as a father and a man. You have then a man who decided with cold, calculated fury that if he couldn't have the ending he wanted, if he couldn't control Renee, then no one could. The kidney donation didn't cause the murder. Let's be absolutely clear about that. Renee's boundless generosity was not a provocation, but it did undeniably mark Renee as gloriously, visibly independent, a woman who lived by her own moral compass, who literally gave a piece of herself for another. And that, in Michael's eyes, was something he simply could not abide. Her act of life-giving became, for him, the ultimate symbol of her freedom from his grasp, and he responded with the ultimate act of taking. Friends, family, and even investigators have for years replayed the agonizing what-ifs. What if the restraining order had truly had teeth, with immediate severe consequences for violations? What if police had been able to GPS track Michael, monitoring his proximity to Renee, turning his intimidation tactics into undeniable evidence? What if Michael had been forced into mandatory intensive counseling, not just as a slap on the wrist, but as a genuine attempt to address his deep-seated issues of control and anger? The uncomfortable, painful truth is that systems fail not because they are inherently flawed in every aspect, but because humans, particularly those who refuse to acknowledge their own toxic patterns, often refuse to change. And when that refusal meets a system that lacks the tools or the will to intervene decisively, the consequences can be devastating, leaving a trail of what-ifs that haunt those left behind. Renee's 3 children didn't just lose their mom that day. They lost their sense of safety and any comforting illusion that the world was safe. For over a decade, they were raised by their father, the man responsible for their mother's death, completely unaware of his monstrous secret. They grew up under a cloud of suspicion they didn't fully understand, learning from internet pages and community whispers that their own father was the primary suspect. The trauma of their mother's murder was compounded by the eventual, horrifying truth of their father's guilt. Therapy over the years certainly helped. It provided a space for them to process the unfathomable grief, the anger, the fear. But some wounds run so deep they never truly heal, they just scar over. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, these milestones, meant for celebration, instead felt like walking through barbed wire, each memory a fresh prick of pain. They grew up with the shadow of their father's monstrous act hanging over them, yet they also grew up steeped in the enduring light of their mother's legacy, lovingly remembered by her friends and family. As they matured, Renee's spirit continued to guide them, manifesting in poignant, deeply personal ways. Her oldest daughter, graduating college, wore Renee's delicate butterfly necklace, a tangible connection to the mother who couldn't be there. The middle child, driven by a fierce need for justice and protection, joined the army, explaining that he wanted to become the protector she needed, an echo of Renee's own selfless nature. And the youngest, perhaps the most private in her grief, kept a journal, a sacred space where she poured out her heart, a direct line to the mother she lost too soon. At Michael's sentencing, these 3 courageous young adults stood before their father, before the court, and delivered their impact statements. Their voices were steady, their eyes blazing with a quiet, powerful defiance. "You took our mother," the eldest said, her words ringing with an undeniable truth, "but you did not take her from us." It was a powerful declaration, a testament to Renee's enduring presence in their lives, a refusal to let Michael's darkness extinguish her light. Michael, in that moment, stared at the table, perhaps for the first time truly confronted with the unvarnished consequences of his actions. Some hurts, some truths, even he, the master manipulator, couldn't twist into someone else's fault. Their strength, their resilience, became Renee's final, most powerful victory. If you take one single, crucial thing from Renee's story, let it be this: kindness, genuine, boundless kindness, is never a weakness. But in the distorted, pathological eyes of a controller, it can look terrifyingly like escape velocity. It can be perceived as the ultimate act of defiance, a clear signal that the victim is moving beyond their grasp, and that, for an abuser, is an intolerable threat. Renee's story, while heartbreakingly unique, offers universal lessons for all of us. For victims of coercive control and domestic violence, experts advise documenting everything, every threat, every violation, every unsettling incident. Vary your routines, create safety plans, and most importantly, trust that gut feeling, that primal scream inside you that whispers or sometimes shouts, "This feels off." Your intuition is a powerful, life-saving alarm bell. For friends, family, and neighbors, the lesson is equally stark. Believe bizarre stories. Believe the whispers, the vague fears, the uneasy glances. Don't dismiss them as marital problems or crazy exes. Those dismissals, those jokes, quietly fuel real danger, allowing abusers to operate in the shadows unchecked. Your belief, your willingness to listen without judgment, can be the lifeline someone desperately needs. And for the systems designed to protect us, the courts, the police, the legal framework itself, there are concrete, actionable steps that could save lives. Courts can mandate monitored custody exchanges, ensuring children are not used as pawns or conduits for abuse. They can deploy GPS ankle monitors for known abusers, creating a digital fence that enforces restraining orders. And they can and must implement immediate, severe jail time for any restraining order violations, sending a clear, unequivocal message that these orders are not suggestions but legal imperatives. These tools exist. The question is whether we choose to use them consistently and effectively. Renee's kidney recipient is alive today, a living, breathing testament to the profound power of her generosity. That act of giving ripples outwards, a continuous wave of life and hope. But Renee's death is an equally potent, equally painful reminder that cruelty too ripples outwards, leaving devastation in its wake, shattering families and eroding our collective sense of safety. Her story compels us to look beyond the headlines, to understand the insidious dynamics of control, and to demand better from ourselves, our communities, and our institutions. If you're reading this and you feel a chill, a recognition in your gut that your own situation or that of someone you know feels frighteningly like Renee's spiral, please don't wait. Don't rationalize, don't minimize. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 800-799-7233 right now. Talk to someone who believes you, someone who can offer support and resources before the worst happens. Your life or the life of someone you love could depend on it. While you're here, hit subscribe for more true crime stories that skip the sensationalism and instead focus on the vital lessons, on what we can actually fix, on how we can prevent future tragedies. Drop a comment below if you think the system needs fixing, if we need to demand more from our institutions. Or just say Renee's name, simple as that. So the algorithms keep her memory alive, keep her story visible, keep her lessons echoing. Renee Pagel's kidney is still filtering blood in a stranger's body, a living, breathing testament that one brave, selfless choice can, quite literally, outlive you. Her story, in that sense, is a beacon, but her full story is harder to hold, a stark, painful reminder that some people, tragically, mistake compassion for betrayal and respond with a horrifying, lethal fury. They see generosity not as a virtue, but as a challenge to their absolute control. But every time we speak her name, every time we refuse to let her be just another statistic, every time we push our courts and our communities to treat coercive control like the insidious, dangerous crime, it truly is. Every time we teach our children unequivocally that love should never hurt, we make it a fraction less likely that the next generous, independent soul ends up a cautionary tale. Renee gave away an organ, a piece of her physical self, and in doing so, she kept her humanity, her essence, whole. Michael, in his rage, kept everything he thought he was entitled to, but in the process, he lost his very soul, his humanity. In the end, the true measure of a life isn't what we take, what we hoard, or what we control. It's what we choose to give, freely and bravely, and what we absolutely refuse to tolerate when that giving becomes dangerous.